Imagine this. You spend your days fixing cars, helping neighbors, and minding your own business. Then one evening, a police officer pulls you over.
I wasn't gonna leave a man
Not because you
stranded.
did anything wrong, but because he
Even if
wants
that
to have
man
a
laughed
laugh
at
at
me.
your expense. He mocks your job, your background, and your worth. But life has a funny way of balancing the scales. Minutes later, the same officer's car breaks down, and the only person who can help him is the very man he just ridiculed. This is the story of David Carter, a black mechanic whose ordinary evening turned into a lesson in respect, humility, and unexpected justice. David Carter wasn't famous. He wasn't wealthy. But in his small town, he was known for one thing: being able to fix anything with an engine. Cars, trucks, even the occasional tractor. David had the kind of hands that could bring machines back to life. He worked as a mechanic in Millbrook, a tight-knit community where people still waved at each other from across the street. Life was simple, predictable, but not always fair. As a black man in a mostly white town, David had grown used to sideways glances, snide comments, and the occasional run-in with authority figures who thought less of him because of the color of his skin. Still, David kept his head down and focused on his work. He believed that respect wasn't given, it was earned. One warm summer evening, David left his garage after a long day. His clothes were still stained with grease, his hands rough from hours of labor. He slid behind the wheel of his old pickup truck, eager to get home, shower, and sit down for dinner with his wife and 2 kids. But just a few miles down the road, flashing red and blue lights lit up his rearview mirror. David sighed. He wasn't speeding. His taillights worked. He knew what this was. Another random stop. The officer stepped out of his cruiser, tall, broad-shouldered, with a cocky grin plastered across his face. His name was Officer Miller, and in town he was known for 2 things: a love for authority and a lack of patience. "Evenin', boy," Officer Miller said, leaning against David's window. David gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Good evening, officer. Is there a problem?" Miller chuckled. "Problem? Nah, just curious what you're doing out here looking like you crawled out of an engine." He waved at David's oil-stained shirt. "What are you? Some backyard grease monkey?" David kept his tone calm. "I'm a mechanic, sir. Just finished a long shift." Miller smirked. "Mechanic, huh? Figures. Probably the only thing you're good at. Bet you couldn't afford a decent car even if you tried." David bit his tongue. He'd been through this before, humiliation dressed up as small talk. He wanted to argue, but he also wanted to get home to his family. So he stayed quiet, answering only when necessary. The officer's laughter grew louder, echoing in the quiet night. He leaned in closer. "Tell you what, Carter. If I ever need a laugh, I'll call you. You can show me how not to fix a car." With a final chuckle, Officer Miller slapped the side of David's truck, waved dismissively, and walked back to his cruiser. David drove off, his chest tight, anger simmering beneath the surface. It wasn't just about the insult. It was about the disrespect, the assumption that because he worked with his hands, because of his skin color, he was less than. But just a few minutes later, fate intervened. David hadn't driven far when he spotted something strange up ahead. A car pulled over on the shoulder of the road, hazard lights flashing. As he got closer, he recognized it immediately. It was Officer Miller's cruiser. Smoke billowed from under the hood, and the officer stood outside, looking bewildered and frustrated. His laughter from earlier was gone. David slowed his truck. For a moment, he considered driving past. Why should he stop? Why help a man who had just mocked him? But something inside him, the same thing that made him a good mechanic, a good neighbor, and a good father, told him otherwise. He pulled over, stepped out, and walked toward the stranded officer. "Need some help?" David asked calmly. Miller turned, his eyes narrowing. "You?" he scoffed. "I'll call a tow truck." David shrugged. "Up to you. But that smoke says your radiator's busted. You'll be standing here a while before a tow shows up." The officer hesitated. Pride clashed with reality. Finally, he sighed. Fine. Do what you gotta do. David popped the hood, the familiar smell of burnt coolant hitting his nose. In minutes, he diagnosed the issue and set to work. His hands moved with confidence, tightening bolts, adjusting hoses, and making temporary fixes to get the car running again. All the while, Officer Miller stood back, watching silently. The cocky grin was gone, replaced with something David hadn't seen before. Uncertainty. You really know what you're doing, Miller muttered reluctantly. David didn't look up. It's my job. When the engine roared back to life, Miller's expression shifted again, this time to relief. He glanced at David, clearly struggling to find the right words. Thanks, he said, his voice quieter now. Didn't think you'd stop. David wiped his hands on a rag, his eyes steady. I wasn't gonna leave a man stranded, even if that man laughed at me. The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Miller swallowed hard. For the first time, he realized the weight of his actions. David didn't wait for an apology. He didn't need one. He walked back to his truck, started the engine, and drove off into the night. Behind him, Officer Miller stood by his cruiser, the irony sinking in. The man he had mocked, the man he had dismissed as nothing more than a grease monkey, had just saved him from being stuck on the side of the road. It was a moment Miller would never forget. A lesson in humility, respect, and the dangerous cost of underestimating people. As for David, he went home that night, hugged his kids a little tighter, and sat down to dinner with his wife. He didn't tell the story for recognition. He didn't brag about teaching the officer a lesson. For David, it was just another day. But deep down, he knew what had happened on that road mattered. Because sometimes, the best way to fight disrespect isn't with anger or revenge. It's with integrity. And sometimes, life itself delivers the justice we crave. So the next time you're tempted to laugh at someone's work, their clothes, or their background, remember this story. Respect costs nothing, but disrespect can cost you everything. Officer Miller learned that the hard way. And David Carter proved that true strength isn't just in fixing engines. It's in holding your head high when others try to bring you down. Because in the end, character always runs longer than pride.